Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Joe Myers, Associate State Director for Engagement and Veterans at AARP South Carolina. Thank you for joining us today for this important conversation on disaster preparedness. Here in South Carolina, we know disasters aren't a question of if, but when, from hurricanes and flooding to severe storms. That's why we've brought together two experts to help you and your family get ready before the next emergency strikes. Joining us today is Leanne Ortiz, Community Preparedness Engagement Manager with Strongword, formerly known as SBP. Founded in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, Strongword is a national nonprofit that helps communities prepare for and recover from disasters, shrinking the time between disaster and recovery so families can get back home faster and stronger. We're also lucky enough to be joined by Andrew Phillips, Chief of Preparedness at the South Carolina Emergency Management Division. SCEMD leads our state's emergency management program, coordinating with all 46 county emergency management offices to prepare for, respond to, and recover from emergency disasters. With the mission of saving lives, reducing suffering, and minimizing property loss. We're so grateful to be joined by both of you, and I hope you enjoy this. And with that, I'll turn it over to Leanne to get us started.
Thank you, Joe. And like Joe mentioned, I am Leanne Ortiz with Strongword. As you probably saw in promotional materials, we're formerly known as SBP or for many as the San Bernard Project. And we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. So as of this Monday, August 3rd, we are now Strongword. Our name has changed, our colors have changed, that branding has changed, but we remain the same organization with the same team and the same mission, which is helping communities prepare for, recover for, and emerge stronger after disasters. We'll continue doing this work through our two core areas. So that's recovery services and advisory services. In this case, our community preparedness team sits under advisory services and remains committed to continue supporting communities through education, through resources, through technical assistance, and through webinars like today to help communities become more prepared and more resilient in the face of disasters. So as you can probably see here, we have a jam-packed agenda today. We'll be starting off with Andrew Phillips, and Preparedness Chief of the South Carolina Emergency Management Division, who's going to share South Carolina hazards and local resources. Then we're going to cover preparedness plan, building off what Andrew will be sharing. We're going to talk a little bit about insurance, protecting important documents, mitigating risks to properties, and then we're going to wrap it up with a Q&A. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Leanne. I appreciate that. And really, I want to start out by saying thank you for having me. These partnerships are incredibly valuable. Those who are attending this webinar right now, this is really just a glimpse into what we do day to day. We are very much a coordinating agency here at SCEMD, the South Carolina Emergency Management Division. We're nothing without our partnerships. And this really highlights this. This continues to build our partnerships, not only with state agencies and counties, but nonprofits, the volunteers after a disaster, and the private sector as well. So that's really key for emergency management and doing public outreach. So thank you, Joe and Leanne. Wanted to really highlight what we do here at SCEMD a little bit, get into some of the hazards that we face here in South Carolina, and then talk about some ways we can prepare for those hazards. So on your screen right now, try to highlight basically everything we can see here in South Carolina. What you notice, pretty much the only thing missing is volcanoes. Fingers crossed, no volcanoes as of right now. When last I checked this morning, no active volcanoes in South Carolina. But pretty much everything else we can experience here. Winter weather, we had that recently, back-to-back weekends here in South Carolina. A lot of people retire, move from the north. A lot of people from Ohio, it seems, or anywhere in the Northeast, they move here to get away from the ice and snow. Probably for the most part, they're successful, but at least once a year, we get a threat of a pretty decent winter storm, it seems. Tornadoes, severe weather, we really get those any time of year, primarily in the spring for tornadoes. Summer, we can get those big summertime thunderstorms. And then again, we have a tornado threat in the fall with our tropical season that we're in. We do have several nuclear power plants in the state. In my section, in the preparedness section, we have an entire section dedicated to plans, training, and exercise for those nuclear power plants to help ensure that those are completely safe and of no danger to the public. So we concentrate a lot on that too. Hurricanes, that gets a lot of the headlines. We'll discuss a lot of that today. We've caught most of a break for last year in 2025, but it was certainly much deserved after what we went through in 2024 with Debbie, and even more so with Helene. Flooding, that seems to continue to be a bigger and bigger issue. We have all sorts of different types of flooding here in South Carolina. Different parts of the state experience different types of flooding. It's a lot slower and spreads out a lot more along the coast. It's a lot quicker once you get closer to the Midlands, and then especially in the upstate. So that's river flooding or flash flooding. Civil unrest, wildfires. That's another one. People move to South Carolina. If you're thinking wildfires, you mainly think, oh, that's an out west problem. And even as recently as this year, South Georgia saw the big wildfires they had there. And then we had our two really big ones last year, in addition to a lot of other fires we probably don't even know about, because we have a great team here in South Carolina, forestry of firefighters. These brush fires, wildfires will break out, then they'll get contained, and no one thinks twice about them. But sometimes they develop in spots that are very, very, very hard to get to. And then those are the ones that really spread and can threaten life and property. Earthquakes. If you've been here any amount of time, you probably have felt an earthquake, especially if you live in the low country, or even recently up here toward the Columbia area, anywhere here across the Midlands. Most of them are fairly minor earthquakes, the damaging earthquakes. Fortunately, very, very far in between those, but we have, you see there in that picture, the great Charleston earthquake in the 1800s. So there is the potential for a big, big damaging earthquake. That's kind of one of our bigger fears here, I guess, and something we do spend a lot of time preparing for. Pandemic, COVID wasn't that long ago. We all know about that. And then cyber, that has become a bigger and bigger threat as well, especially in the last couple of years. So on the next page, if you don't believe me, or you just moved down here, could you go back one slide? We have had a lot of disasters here in the state, and we've had a lot of federally declared disasters. So just to list off some of these that we have from these hazards, we've had several for hurricanes, ice storms, tornadoes, flooding, flash flooding. So we've had a lot of federally declared disasters, which just means we've reached a certain monetary threshold of damages. So that happens fairly often around here, unfortunately. Okay, so yeah, the next slide. Thank you, Leanne. We'll focus on the hurricane hazard. So certainly not just a coastal problem, but that is what our evacuation zones are designed around, is the coastal areas. So especially if you do live there, this is incredibly important to know your zone. You'll hear that a lot in my talk today, and really anything we put out of knowing your zone. So these evacuation zones are drawn really around the potential storm surge threat, which is the ocean being pushed on shore. And that has historically been the biggest threat to life and property. So a lot of time, money, effort, coordination went into putting together a lot of resources for evacuation zones. And this is our most recent map, last updated in 2024. So this is still relevant for this year. They are based around storm surge risk along there in the county. And it's very important to know which one you're in, especially before an event, because if we do have a hurricane coming and an evacuation is ordered by our governor, it will be called by evacuation zone. So that's something you don't really want to be trying to scramble to figure out once an evacuation is ordered. It's something you can easily know now. And we have a lot of resources for that, including a Know Your Zone page on our website, where you can just plug in your address and it'll tell you whether you're in an evacuation zone or not. So if you are in any of those coastal counties, that's something I'd like to invite you to please do today if you don't already know your zone. And on the next slide, so I mentioned the storm surge threat. Why do we evacuate? There's a lot of questions around that. We are purely looking at the storm surge threat because, as we've seen, especially during Helene, hurricanes are not confined to the coast. Helene really reminded us in a really hard way that the inland areas, really an entire statewide event, could be severely impacted by a hurricane. The wind, the flooding from Helene But again, storm surge is why those evacuations are called for along the coast. And you see here, this is the graphic we have on our hurricane.sc page, the animated one that shows you what 10 feet of storm surge inundation would be. That's all you hear a message is storm surge. If you're thinking 10 feet, a long time ago, if you've been a weather nerd for as long as a lot of us have, you had to know kind of your elevation and tide levels, and that when factoring in what storm surge was. The National Hurricane Center has made that much easier. If they say 10 feet in this location, they mean truly 10 feet above ground level. So, for example, if they're messaging 10 feet, that's first floor buildings, that's covering cars, that's covering that guy there standing with his very sturdy umbrella, I guess, since he's using it underwater. But that's dangerous. You think about that: the moving water, the currents, they don't stop, the waves. So that's why we evacuate, is because that has historically been the biggest killer. And if you can see, I mean, just a really dramatic example of storm surge. I do believe this picture is from Louisiana, one of the hurricanes there. You see that picture on the left there of in the bathroom. The water line is a few feet up on the tub. That looks pretty bad in and of itself. But then you see that picture on the right. That's actually in the second floor of that house. So if you stayed behind and didn't evacuate during that hurricane, you would have probably been in the attic, maybe on the roof. The last place you probably want to be during the hurricane. And you see that he's staying in there. It's completely dry. So it's above normally dry ground. So that's really how dangerous storm surge can be, and why we emphasize that so much, especially for evacuating. And we urge people to evacuate when they're asked to do so. Those decisions certainly are not made lightly. So some statistics on the next page. Probably a lot of factors that go into statistics like this. Like I mentioned, if you look at pre-2013 hurricane stats, storm surge by far the biggest killer. But a lot of time, resources, energy has been put into coming up with evacuation zones, figuring out what's preventing people from evacuating if they're not. Is it time? Is it money? Is it transportation? And we, as a state EMD, not just in South Carolina, but across the country, we're always looking at ways to mitigate that. We realize evacuating is incredibly inconvenient at the very least, and it could be really detrimental to everything, your income. You don't want to leave your home. You don't want to leave your pets behind. So we do a lot of planning into trying to make an already difficult and stressful situation as easy as possible to encourage people to evacuate. But you see there, the numbers, we've cut down on the storm surge deaths, but freshwater flooding now has really started to rise. And over the past decade, has become the biggest killer in these events is freshwater flooding. And unfortunately, a lot of those are preventable as well. A lot of times it is, I don't have those broken down exactly, but a lot of people driving around barricades into floodwaters and getting washed away, not realizing how powerful that even just a couple of feet of water can be. So that's continued to be a big focus for us here in South Carolina, especially in light of a lot of the flooding we have seen in the past decade or so. Wind is creeping up there as well. A lot of those from down trees, falling. So one big thing we say is we run from the water, hide from the wind. So we want people to treat wind very seriously. Hurricane force winds, treat that like a tornado. Want you to be as safe as possible and do everything you can to put as many walls, as much protection between you and the outside as possible. And then you see some of those other things as well, even rip currents at the beach, that continues to affect people, even from storms that are very far away. So great resource we have on this next slide, hurricane.sc. And we have our hurricane guide that is online. And then we do have the Know Your Zone pages also on that as well. So looking at some of our previous events and some unique situations that may have happened from those. We had Hurricane Florence. That was in 2018, if you were here for that. That really changed from, we're looking at a big major hurricane with all the threats across the board, the storm surge, the hurricane force winds, to becoming a clear, significant freshwater flooding threat. And I think some of the problem we run into, and this is really a national problem and probably an issue with all of us, is we love focusing on the wind speed. That goes for emergency management, that goes for the news media, goes for everybody. That's how the hurricanes are categorized. We have the Saffir-Simpson scale that we use for hurricanes, 1 through 5, all based on wind speed. So when we see the categories change, whether they go up or go down, that really changes how people perceive how bad this storm is going to be. So Florence was one of those that technically weakened. So the headlines across the board, and you see here, this is just one poll, not bullying this group or singling them out, because that was, I mean, I'm sure it was universal of down the hurricane. The headline was the latest Florence downgraded to a Category 1 hurricane. That tells me don't have to worry about this one as much anymore. But at the same time, the forecast rainfall totals were creeping up to levels that we hadn't seen before, 20 to 30 inches. National Hurricane Center was already mentioning life-threatening, catastrophic flash flooding and prolonged significant river flooding. So these are around the same time. You can see the Hurricane Center, catastrophic flash flooding, prolonged significant river flooding. But the headline is Florence was downgraded. So you can see the gap there in the messaging. And while we're really trying to bring that piece together of getting people to focus not on the category of storm, but what these specific hazards are for that storm, because they are going to change and changes how we prepare and message things here in South Carolina. And so on the next slide, still some historical numbers from Hurricane Florence. And I mentioned we've seen in the last decade significant flooding events, basically from every big tropical event we've gotten. It's either been the headline for that event or it's been something that has come afterward. So we got this from our friends at the Department of Natural Resources Climatology Office. They have the highest rainfall totals in South Carolina from tropical cyclones and their remnants from all the way 1956 to 2024. A lot of recent history there in those top 3, especially, and even in the top 5. We have Florence there sitting at number 1, almost 2 feet of rain. So that is the highest amount in South Carolina that we've seen directly from a tropical system. Right behind it, Debbie, 2024. Helene, same year, not even 2 months apart, now holds the 3rd spot up there, almost close to 20 inches. Another one, Beryl, back in 1994. That didn't really get many headlines either. The center never even crossed into the state of South Carolina. Still brought well over a foot of rain. And then there's Matthew, another one in somewhat recent history at almost 17 inches. And then Hurricane Floyd, Hurricane Dorian. So there's a lot of recent history on this map showing you just how big the freshwater flooding threat is caused by rain in these storms. So that's something we always want to make sure people are aware of, what their potential threat is from freshwater flooding. So that's something else we want people to make sure that they know of before being impacted. On the next slide, look at Hurricane Helene. So even a little bit more recent. Those Hurricane Helene numbers, we did see pretty big impacts for that as well, where we had a lot of rain and, of course, the wind, especially across the inland areas. And it did bring a lot of tornadoes, which is another pretty big tropical hazard that we can get here in the state, but also in the spring. So we're no stranger to that here in South Carolina. I've been working to get an updated map, but this gives a pretty good idea of where we tend to see our bigger tornadoes. See, from 1950 to 2019, EF0 all the way up to EF4, which is the enhanced Fujita scale. That's how, kind of like the Saffir-Simpson scale for hurricanes, that's what's used for tornadoes. And you can see we primarily have some of those, the lower end ones that'll still do some damage, but not really the catastrophic, completely leveling homes type damage that we might see, even as close as Alabama, Mississippi, and then Oklahoma. Some of those real giant tornadoes that are just wiping things completely clean. But we have seen those here in the state. You see a few of those red lines on there, especially. A lot of those that you see on here were from one single tornado outbreak in 1984. And those not captured here is our most recent big tornado outbreak, which was in 2020. And we had a lot of significant tornadoes in some areas that we have not ever seen a significant tornado all the way back to 1950. So I think like Hampton County, Colleton County, Those areas tend to not get those big tornadoes, but they got them during that event. So really anywhere in the state, you need to be prepared for anything, for any sort of tornado threat. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just the tornadoes, we have ice storms as well. So completely switching gears here, we've had several winter storms in the past few years, certainly no stranger to that here. Our last really big one that was created significant impacts and kind of set us on this run for seeing these bigger storms here in South Carolina and our federally declared disasters was the February 2014 ice storm. So we had those numbers there. May not seem like much, but when you're talking ice, it really doesn't take all that much. If you remember this year, we had amounts generally saying a half an inch and everything. That's certainly not as much. It's not going to, again, grab the headlines very much. But for ice, you're not talking about too much before it starts causing widespread power outages, down trees, makes transportation impossible. Really anything above a quarter of an inch is really going to cause a big response at the local and state level. 2014, based on numbers approaching an inch. So that was, you see what happens there. There's the reality on that picture of big trees falling down, taking down power lines, roads completely impassable. And with it being cold, that adds a whole other factor. If you're without power for any amount of time, even if it's nice out, that can cause a lot of issues, especially if you are power dependent. But an ice storm really ramps that up because you have power going out and it's also very cold, so quickly losing heat. So that's something we are planning a lot for here at the state, and another big concern for us. And with that 2014 ice storm, there was also a lot of snow. Sometimes we get both. Sometimes we get the freezing rain and we get the snow. So on the next slide, that you can see that we had some fairly high snow amounts from that event too. And then moving on to our next hazards, which was earthquakes. So I mentioned we get a lot of smaller earthquakes here in the state. You maybe felt, maybe not. A lot of them probably we don't even know. We get a report from United States Geological Survey showing that we had a minor earthquake. Nobody really felt it. We've started to get some more of the felt earthquakes, as we would say, where you feel the shaking, you hear the rumbling. In the summer, it's kind of playing that game of, hey, was that an earthquake or was that thunder? But for the truly big ones, so say magnitude 4 or higher, those are fairly unusual in the state. And then we had that big one in Charleston in the 1800s that if that happened today, it would be really devastating. So we're in South Carolina. We spent a lot of time and energy, public messaging on being prepared for earthquakes as well, especially in that part of the state, the Charleston, Dorchester, Berkeley part of the state, where if we did have another big Charleston earthquake of the magnitude we saw in the 1800s, it would be even more devastating because we live in a wonderful state that everybody wants to move to. So our population has dramatically and continues to dramatically increase. On the next slide, we get into a little bit more than what we do here at the state level, and a lot of things we focus on. So this is community lifelines is what we call it. It's a fairly new concept, I think, within the last decade or so. Kind of breaks us into categories, things that we need for society to function as normal. So if these things are functioning normally, and for the most part they are in the state, we don't notice any difference. We turn a light switch on. We're on our computers right now. Power's working just fine. Turn on our faucet. Water's working. Safety and security was everything. You call the 911, you get a response. It's happening. So everything is working normally. But if one of these are affected, one of these goes down, you immediately notice it. And they aren't independent of each other either. There's a lot of things that are interdependent, as we would say. So like Helene, for example, the energy component, the power goes out, that affects every single one of these lifelines in one way or another. Health and medical, that's going to be hard on the hospitals. They got to make sure they have their generators up and running. Same with water treatment. Same with transportation. So really these all work together. So we are very cognizant of if one of these are affected, what other things may be affected as well. And we're trying to lean forward, as we would say here, and plan ahead as much as we can to anticipate impacts to lifelines, and all get together here at the state level and at the county level and all our partners and try to coordinate of how to restore these lifelines as quickly as possible. So a little more into emergency preparedness at the personal level. We do have the 4 P's. So we do talk planning for people, pets, and property. Those are all really important things we want to make sure we're accounting for, and we're putting our personal emergency plans together. And you see those fine folks there. They definitely have their plan ready to go. They're very happy to have that. My dog Archie, he's very happy that he was accounted for in our personal plan. And then property, that's another big thing as well. Those are all tied together in one way or another. We got our family, friends, pets, and property, all things we want to make sure we are planning for. And we try to procure as many resources as we can from the state level, and from I mentioned all those partners earlier, we get those shared with them as well. We really try to push these out across the board and pack as many resources in there as we can. So you see we have some specific publications. We have a hurricane guide, we have earthquake guide, and we have the South Carolina winter weather guide. So those are the 3 big ones we have right now. We're working on a flood guide. So as I mentioned before, with flooding having caused a lot of problems here in our state, we want to have a flood specific guide. So there are some things that are going to be pretty universal across the board. We're always going to be messaging the personal preparedness side of things, always messaging, making sure we have kits, your personal supply kits available. But there are some things that are going to be unique per hazard and how we treat those differently. We want to make sure that's clear, and we have something shared for people that are going to be responding to these things. So like mentioned, the hurricane guide is going to have information about knowing your zone, knowing your evacuation route, and anything specific to hurricanes. Next page, please. Another great resource, another one of our key partners for senior prep, especially, that's their focus, the Department on Aging. So they have a lot of good resources as well. That is one partner we certainly work with a lot, that is focused on an aging population. Any resources that are specific to them, that's something they're always going to be paying attention to, making sure they're pushing out information on that. And we do a lot of support with them as well, a lot of joint public information efforts. I know we have senior prep days is something we work very closely with them on. Next slide is our website, scemd.org. A lot of great resources on there as well. So I mentioned the guides we have. There's digital copies on here, and all sorts of other resources. Any of those icons you click on, we have a couple of hazard-specific websites you can go to, learn about what we do here at EMD, learn how to personally prepare, learn what the state's doing, what the latest status of the state is, the governor's press conferences, if he's holding them related to the disaster. The link to that will be on here. So we try to always keep this updated as possible, as much information on here as we possibly can. To make sure that it's a one-stop shop for everything you may need for disasters. And then we also have an app. So you're able to download the Emergency Manager app, and it's very much like our website. A lot of those key resources on there that you can use. And we also push notifications. One of the cooler things that we have available on there is you can get a sign up for earthquake alerts. So anytime there's an earthquake, you can set the parameters of how, do you want it just if it's near your house, or do you want it for the entire state? You can change that, and you'll get an alert for every time there's an earthquake registered by the USGS. So good party trick for you and your friends. You can show it off and be able to tell them right away if you had an earthquake or not. It's usually pretty quick if that comes up. When everybody says inevitably, did you feel that shaking? You could be like, yep, I already got the earthquake alert because I downloaded my Emergency Manager app. All right, next slide. So before an emergency, just some key things we really want to hone in on. Spent the first part of a presentation blabbing a lot about knowing your risks. I think that is very important. You don't want to spend a lot of time preparing for something that you're not at risk for. Like in South Carolina, we don't need to talk about volcanoes too much. Don't want to spend too much time on that. But pretty much everything else you can know, but you're going to have specific risks depending on where you are. Am I vulnerable to flash flooding? Am I in a mobile home? Then I may need to take even more precautions before a hurricane comes, with hurricane winds, severe thunderstorms, tornadoes. Mobile homes are more susceptible to being damaged by wind. So you may need to even consider going somewhere else, where if you're in a brick home, it may be better to designate your safe room that's within your house and make sure that that's ready to go. So those are going to be some differences in knowing your personal risk. And then making a plan for your family, your friends. I mentioned the cascading impacts. So that's just the word we're using for what I talked about the community lifelines. It's not just the power went out. It's okay, the power goes out and it's 25 degrees out. The power goes out from a hurricane, it's 95 degrees out. So it's not just the power's out. There's a lot of different factors that you do have to consider, and a lot of things that can be harmful to you. So we really encourage people to be ready for that. And even think of that for hurricane evacuations. Like if you're being ordered to evacuate, and a lot of times it's going to be over evacuated just because of the nature of things, but your house may be fine. But if you don't have power, you don't have water, probably not going to want to be there anyway. So you have to take into consideration all those things when making a decision. Family and friend support, that is a big thing. And these really last two ones are very well tied together. They go both ways. So if you need family and friend support, don't be afraid to ask. And if you are completely squared away, you feel like you have a great plan for your family, then we all know somebody in our neighborhood, we all know somebody close to us who pops into our head, and you think, if we have a big hurricane, if we have another Hurricane Helene, my neighbor is going to need a lot of help. So taking what energy you have, you're ready to go, making sure that they're ready to go as well, checking on them during the disaster, going over there and helping them put a supply kit together, making sure they know who to call if they need oxygen, make sure they're squared away before an event. So those personal relationships are so key. We can talk as much here as we want at the state, but a lot of times people are going to listen to their friends and neighbors more than they're going to listen to any of us talking to you. Next slide, please. So again, the building that support network, identifying the family, friends, caregivers who can help before the storm, before something happens. Create a contact list, names, numbers, and roles. That's big too, because again, we know it's stressful. We get in those modes where phone numbers, people's names may not come to the top of mind when a lot of bad things are happening. So it's helpful to have those things written down so you know who to contact if things were to go badly. And then talk through emergency plans in advance. Let your family and friends know where you're planning on going. Is it you're planning on staying home, or you're planning to evacuate? You're planning to stay with somebody, or would you consider going to a general population shelter, like we think like a Red Cross DSS run shelter? Or would you require medical equipment power shelters, somewhere you need to plug in an oxygen concentrator, any other power dependency? That's important to let people know what your plan is for what you're doing. So really it's about, we emphasize communication and coordination a lot here at the state, big state government level, but then all the way down to the individual neighbor helping neighbor. That's the only way we're going to truly be able to make it through some of these events without as best we can. And on the next slide, this quote I pulled from, this is a long time ago. I probably Hurricane Matthew, I think, but I think it's really encompassing of a lot of human nature, and a lot of what we think here is that residents knew all too well that a storm was at their doorstep and that many people would be affected. They just think it wouldn't affect them. And that comes from, why do people stay put during hurricanes? But really, I think this could be broad brush across the board for any sort of hazard. Is, okay, I know this hurricane's coming, somebody's going to get affected. It's probably not going to be me. So I think we don't want everybody to be paranoid and scared all the time, but it's trying to change that mentality of this won't happen to me, it's going to happen to somebody else, to even this probably won't happen to me, or it's not that likely, but if it does, I want to make sure me and my family and my friends and my neighbors are as ready for this thing as we possibly can be. So that's what I want to leave you with today. And I think that's it for my slides. I don't think I have any more on there. There's just our nice SCEMD logo. But I will stay on the line and take any questions now, or happy to take any at the end.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And like you mentioned, it's better to be prepared even if nothing happens than like to be met with something at your doorstep that you're not ready to navigate. So definitely agree with that. But building on what Andrew was just sharing, we're going to hop into making a preparedness plan. Here at Strongword, we like to divide it into three things, which is gathering your supplies, creating a plan, and then planning for recovery. So over here on this slide, you've probably seen a bunch of these lists, especially now during hurricane season, especially like in the South, we see this a lot. But when it comes to it, we want to just make sure that you have the right supplies in hand for your safety and your comfort of you and those in your household. So we encourage you to make sure that you're tailoring your kit to those needs that you have, that you're making sure that there are updated supplies, that maybe you built that kit maybe 2 or 3 years ago, that you're taking time this week or in as near term as possible to make sure that everything's up to date. And who knows, maybe those needs have changed. A couple of guidance here to keep in mind is if you're sheltering in home, to have at least 3 days, sheltering at home, at least 2 weeks of easy to prepare non-perishable foods and at least 1 gallon of water per person. And please also think about your pets as you're doing that math. And I would even add more if you're thinking of someone's coming to your household, someone that you know would be sheltering with you, thinking about them in that math. If you're evacuating, thinking about 3 days worth of easy to prepare foods, clothing, and water as well. And a couple of different things to keep in mind. We like recommending a bucket and a lid because it's a very versatile tool. You keep all of your materials safe and dry, but if you needed to use the tool, the bucket for removing debris or for collecting water or just to like use it as a seat, it's really great and it doesn't take up a lot of space. So just thinking through some of those items, especially first aid kits, medication, maps, and stuff like that. And we already know disasters can be costly, especially as they continue increasing in frequency, but also in intensity. But we always like to drive home the fact that building a kit doesn't have to be expensive. I know every time we see these lists, we immediately see a bunch of dollar signs, right? Of like, how am I going to get that all at once? First recommendation would be to shop your home. Oftentimes, we have a lot of these items already at home. They're just scattered throughout. So making sure that we're putting them all in one place, a safe space that could be easily accessible, that everybody knows where it is in the home. So if they need to take it and grab it and go, they know where to find it and it's easy to take. Making sure that we're spreading out those purchases here and there. Maybe it's a packet of water when you go to the grocery store. Maybe it's a couple of cans of foods, a couple of batteries, those type of things. But after you shop your home, you kind of identify what are those things that might be needing. Visiting cost-saving stores like Dollar General, Dollar Tree, even the thrift store, things don't have to be brand new. As long as they work, you're all good to go. And then making sure that you're doing use of your sales tax holidays. Usually, when it comes to disaster preparedness, we often see those right before hurricane season, or now thinking creatively with through other sales tax holidays based on what you need on your list. And last but not least, keeping an eye on local organizations or reaching out to see what resources they have available and which resources are they willing to give that can help you build your kit. Building on what Andrew was sharing about staying informed, the case for South Carolina, you'll have some really great resources. Not only do you have a great emergency management division who always keeps information updated, you also have an app. So making sure that you're staying connected to those, that you're staying connected to your news, whether it be through TV, through app, through radio, just making sure that you're getting information from those trusted resources, but also knowing where to get it. So when something's happening, you're not trying to scramble to see what channel it is, what handle to find it, what radio station and such. Another great resource is the NOAA weather radio. They're not super expensive. You can usually find them. I recently saw one for like $13. It was hand cranked. It had solar. It had batteries. I was honestly very surprised how good it was for that price. But it's a really great alternative, especially when we maybe don't have access to TV, we don't have access to our phones, or there's no signal to still be able to receive that life-saving information. So always recommend having one of those at hand in your home. And like mentioned, making sure that you're plugging into those different apps, whether that be the Red Cross emergency app, the South Carolina emergency app, also FEMA. Not only are they great to getting information and timely information, but also ahead of time, understanding how to prepare and also understanding what are the risks, what does this mean, what does this look like for me. And then hopping here really quickly into creating an emergency plan. We can talk about this for hours on end, but we just wanted to touch on a couple of different points here. The importance of creating a plan. Of course, we don't want to be thinking about worst case scenario, right? No one wants to do that. But when you have a plan in place, it serves as your roadmap, that lighthouse when worst case scenario does happen. So that way, it's already a very stressful, you're most likely in a very stressful environment if things are ongoing during a disaster. But if you have a plan in place, you already know what are those steps that you need to take. What are those actions that you and your family and your loved ones are going to do? And it does help with that, maybe that decision fatigue that one might experience. So a couple of good things to do is making sure that you take time to create that plan. If you have one already, making sure that we're practicing it at least once a year. Sometimes there's household changes, maybe there's different needs that have happened. Maybe there's a new family member, maybe someone moved, maybe there's somebody else staying with one, those type of things. And making sure that we're updating things as they go. Maybe you have a solid plan and you're like, hey, I think we can make this a little bit more efficient if we redistribute some roles across the household. That could be a thing. Making sure again that you're checking all of your supplies at least once a year. In our household, we like to do that at the top of the year. It just makes sense that way. But setting a calendar reminder that just like reminds you annually to make sure that you're changing what it is that you need to change. Making sure that you're taking time to understand what are the procedures for work, for schools, for community spaces, maybe it's church, a group that you volunteer with, to understand what their emergency procedures are like, just in case that you're caught in it, or if not, just in case that they're counting on you to support them. Maybe they're like, hey, we're counting on you to help us prepare the facility if something that's happened. Those are things that you need to build into your plan. So different things like that. And making sure that we're connecting with neighbors, not just to like plan how we can support each other, but to understand what are their needs. So that way, if there's a way that we can support, you can support them. If maybe there's different skills, usually in a neighborhood, there's a wide variety of skills. You know who to go to. Of like, hey, we can get this tree out of the way, or we can go and help this other neighbor out who needs medical equipment or needs electricity to be able to receive to be able to receive their treatment, things like that. So making sure that we're staying connected, just like Andrew said. And last but not least, making sure that we're not driving in unsafe conditions. Maybe that's to flooding, maybe it's during winter weather. If we can avoid being on the street, better to avoid it. You don't want to get yourself hurt, or if not, get somebody else hurt in the process. And last but not least, I know Andrew mentioned it, and making sure that you're keeping your pets in mind as you're planning for preparedness. South Carolina has a great tool to like help you and things to think about as you're preparing and thinking about your pet in that process. Now, going over here to a very important part here, a strong word that we like to talk about, which is preparing for recovery. Oftentimes, when we think about preparedness, we're thinking about how we're going to navigate a disaster or an emergency, but then we sometimes kind of stop there. But we also want to think about how are we planning for recovery again if worst case scenario does happen. One of those things to keep in mind is savings. I know financial situations vary per person. I know things are incredibly expensive nowadays, so it might not be possible to always save a certain amount. But what I usually tell people, especially when I get the question of, Leanne, what amount should I be saving? Is if you can save a dollar here, a dollar there, that's maybe, let's say, $20 that you're accounting with if something does happen that you could use towards fuel or food or anything like that. So adjusting that based on your current ability to save money. And why do we need to save money for recovery? Well, maybe it's needing emergency cash. Oftentimes we know that card systems are not available. Maybe we need a shelter, maybe we need to get gas or pay for debris removal, different things like that that maybe we're accounting for. But also a very important reason why we need to save is for our deductibles. So deductibles is the amount of money that you're responsible to pay your insurance before you get before your insurance coverage applies. So you want to make sure that first you know what your deductible is, and if possible, that you're saving towards it so that doesn't become a barrier between you and your road to recovery. I won't go too in depth here, but it's something that we like to highlight because within the recovery space, we've seen a lot of confusion and issues around this. And I think a perfect time to read up on this or get acquaintance with this is now during blue skies when we're not in the middle of a recovery. And it's understanding what financial options are available to you if the disaster does happen. So first and foremost, if one can meet with a financial counselor to like look at your budgets, to support with savings, to support with any mitigation actions you can take in your home, that's great. But also to understand like what that disaster landscape looks like if something were to happen. I know that's not usually something that's available to everyone, but there's organizations like Operation Hope who support individuals in preparing financially for recovery. So definitely recommend checking them out. They have a lot of great free resources that one can do at your own time, and then connect with someone if you would like to do so. And then the other part that I think is the most important part here is SBA loans. So oftentimes SBA, so Small Business Administration, that's what you get offered first, usually when you apply for FEMA aid if a disaster is federally declared. And what SBA does is that they offer low interest disaster loans to homeowners and renters. So it's not just businesses. And that part alone usually confuses people already of like, why is the SBA offering me a loan during this process? So I always encourage folks to learn what that process looks like, what it means for them, because if they're faced with that decision, they're not making that decision without having time to understand what it looks like. So if it's you or someone else that you can help but just educate throughout that process, I definitely recommend looking into it. We put a link here for folks to understand what that usually looks like too. And then I say all of this of the importance of recovery and all these different tools to use because oftentimes we're using different tools, savings, insurance, maybe it's tapping into loans like SBA or just federal aid or just disaster aid in general for nonprofits or the state. And we would talk about that because unfortunately, the type of assistance available for a disaster will vary. It depends on where you live. It depends on the impact. It depends on if it was federally declared or not. So we know that disaster assistance at the end of the day is not going to also be guaranteed. So we want to make sure that folks understand what the tools are and that they're planning for recovery. So that way they do have a viable road to get back to safe, sanitary, and secure housing conditions. Like I mentioned, and you've probably seen already, FEMA is most likely going through different changes. We know we've seen it happen day in, day out. What maybe we consider a disaster in our community might not be considered a disaster completely to be able to access that aid. So understanding how that works too is a really great resource. Maybe you're like, hey, I'm all set. I know how FEMA works. So maybe it's educating a loved one or a neighbor on like, hey, this is how disaster aid works. It does ease a lot of stress and difficult conversations when worst case scenario does happen. And I'll finish this section here with just stating that a lot of people don't know that they can appeal. They have a right to appeal FEMA decisions, just like they have a right to appeal insurance decisions as well. So understanding what those tools are, understanding that they have a right to do that, and encouraging people to advocate for themselves to be able to get the best support for themselves. Okay, going into insurance here, we know insurance policies can be full of confusing language. I do remember the first time that I received my my homeowner's insurance, and I was just like, oh gosh, I do not know what a lot of these things mean. So if you're in the same boat as me, which is gonna go, or we're in the same boat as I was, we're gonna go through a couple of things here. First and foremost, we know that the insurance landscape is changing very rapidly. So I just want to acknowledge that it feels like it changes every year. There's a lot of changes that we're seeing nationally, and it looks very different based on where you're at, even sometimes within the same state. So it's very important that first and foremost, you know the basics of your insurance policy. So you want to know what is covered and how it's covered too. And if you're a renter, it's very important for you to understand that first, that you can have renter's insurance, and it's very recommended for you to have it, but that your landlord's insurance policy is only going to cover the structure. It's not going to cover the contents of your, like all your belongings inside. So that's why it makes it so important to have it. So here you see two different policy types. So for example, we have named peril policies, which cover losses for specific perils listed in your policy. And then we have an all risk policy, as you can see here, which covers you for any accidental loss, except for those explicitly excluded. So another key aspect that you're seeing here in that lower corner is that you need to figure out what's your coverage value. Is it replacement cost coverage and actual cash value? Which was like, at least for me, when I was looking into insurance, was like the thing that was confusing me a lot. So replacement cost coverage, it's going to reimburse you for your items at their full replacement value. And then we have actual cash value, which is going to take depreciation into account. So often it's not going to be able to fully replace your item. So understanding which one do you currently have, or if you're shopping for insurance, which one would you prefer to have depending on your needs? And this is an important part here, especially as Andrew was talking about flooding and it being an increasing disaster risk in South Carolina. And we see that also across the entire nation. Flooding, unfortunately, is one of those common exclusions that we see in a lot of policies. Oftentimes, flooding is not included in your homeowners or renters insurance. A lot of folks, they just have it bundled. So oftentimes the thought is that it's part of homeowners insurance, but that's a separate offering. So please take time to understand if it's something that you need. Oftentimes, usually the answer is yes, even if you're outside of a mandatory flood zone to have that flood insurance. But also, a lot of exclusions include things that can happen during a regular day. So maybe it could be pest damage, drain or sewer backup that can happen on a sunny day. So thinking through things of like, hey, these are things that can happen or things that I would like covered so I can have peace of mind. So making sure that we're checking what's covered in our policy. And then last but not least, making sure that we're taking time to ask our agents for for clarity of like what is covered in my insurance. Making sure that like we feel comfortable doing those questions. Maybe you don't want to go to an insurance agent or a broker. And maybe it's asking a trusted individual to like help you go through these questions that you might have. Just talking here really quickly, I just mentioned that flood insurance is not typically covered by standard homeowners or renters insurance. But just to drive the point a little bit further of why it's so important to have it, especially in communities that are recurrently impacted by flooding. 1 inch of water can cost $27,000 in damages. So that's 1 inch of water. While the FEMA average disaster assistance grant is around $5,000, but the average flood insurance payout is around $69,000. So you see that gap. I know if I were to experience $27 in damages right now and I didn't have coverage through flood insurance, I think I would be reconsidering a lot of things. I hope that's never the case, but I know in our case for our household living in Houston, Texas, it does give us a lot of peace of mind to be able to have adequate insurance coverage. So I always encourage folks to look into it, look into the National Flood Insurance Program. On average, their policies are around $800 a year. And since last year, they've implemented monthly payments, making it more accessible. And if you're someone who's outside of the mandatory flood zone, oftentimes that average is around $400. So seeing if it's something that's viable for you. And then here we have just a couple of different resources, again, understanding that you do have a right to not feel rushed into a settlement amount, that you have resources to help you understand insurance, but also support you through the process if you are claiming to your insurance. Going really quickly here into protecting our documents. This is one of my favorite ways to get prepared because the only investment that you're doing is an investment of time. So we want to make sure that we have our important documents together before disaster strikes because oftentimes this could be the barrier between you and a speedier recovery. So a couple of things to keep in mind when we're thinking about personal documents is making sure that we have our IDs, our birth and marriage certificates, any immigration documents, and even pet records. So thinking of everyone in the household. When we're thinking of our household, what are things that you want to access quickly, such as emergency contacts, service providers, personal keepsakes, keeping those in mind. And then we're thinking about financial and legal, making sure that we have all of insurance policies, copies of those, home and vehicle ownership records with the right names on it, and any important financial information you want to keep at hand. And last but not least, and very importantly, medical documentation. We want to make sure that we have our medical history, that we have our insurance cards, that we have a list of our prescriptions, just in case that you need to access care somewhere else, or if not, that the systems are down and you can get quality care with the information that you have in hand. A couple of different ways to secure documents here. Making sure, if possible, to have it in a fireproof or waterproof safe. Now they make some great folders too, so maybe that could be an option. If anything, a sealed back like a Ziploc is excellent, especially if we're thinking about flooding or any water or storm events. I've seen a good Ziploc go through hell and back and be able to like keep things dry. So that could be an alternative. And making sure that we have our originals and our backups stored separately if possible. Maybe it's for the loved one with an attorney, maybe it's a safety deposit box. making sure that if possible and if you feel comfortable with it, having a digital alternative to all of your important documents. Maybe that's putting it in a cloud, maybe again, putting it in a flash drive. And there's a lot of great ways to scan nowadays. We can do it with our phones, we could do it at the library. So considering some of those things or requesting help from loved ones. And then wrapping up here, because I know we're almost at time, going into mitigating risk. When we're talking about mitigating risk to our home, it's just we want to reduce the impact that our home might experience if a disaster were to happen. So inspection is one of the best ways to do that because disasters only exacerbate existing conditions. So maybe that's inspecting heating and cooling systems, testing fire alarms, removing dead vegetation, expecting your roof, and trying to make those improvements beforehand. And a couple of different things to do right before an emergency. Maybe that's securing outdoor items. You never want to be the neighbor that has something like flying away, becoming a projectile, and that way you have peace of mind. But also bringing valuable items indoor or just raising them up when possible and closing all interior windows and doors. I was the one during hurricane that did not close windows and there was a lot of water inside the house. I learned my lesson. So learn from that. Make sure that you're protecting your home. And a couple of different mitigation actions here, making sure that we're installing, if possible, or if it's relevant to you, that we're elevating HVAC system or any systems that's possible. Mitigation at the end of the day is a sustained action to reduce and eliminate long-term risk. So there's a lot of different things that you can do based on where your home is and the needs that you have based on what you know, what your risks are. So we tagged here IBHS as a great resource to understand what are different mitigation actions you can take. And one of those in South Carolina is installing a fortified roof or building to fortified standards. Y'all have a really great program called South Carolina Safe Home Mitigation. So I encourage you to look into it to see if you qualify and when that next round will open for support. Wrapping up here again with mitigation, we talk about mitigation a lot because not only is it important to reduce risks for your home, but also a lot of actions will help you reduce insurance costs. So I recommend looking into what that looks like through Smart Home America in South Carolina. They show a couple of different incentives and active programming, but also checking with your insurance to understand like, hey, what can I do to reduce this insurance? Okay, so we're here at resources. We have AARP's Disaster Resiliency Toolkit. Recommend reading it. It has a lot of great resources to understand how to better prepare and strengthen resilience within communities. And then we have here some of the resources that Andrew was going through with South Carolina. Recommend reading them if you haven't seen them in a while, popping back in there and seeing some of those updates, or if not, sharing it with a loved one or with a neighbor. So with that, we're going to open up for Q&A. I saw here that we had a great question come in. So Andrew, I believe this one's for you. With rapid growth along the Grand Strand, changing floodplain maps, and increasing storm impacts, how is South Carolina adapting its public preparedness messaging to ensure new residents understand their true risks and don't rely solely on past storm experiences when making preparedness decisions?
And that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it and hopefully answered some of it during our presentations here. But I saw that comment in there and been thinking about it. And a lot of it is we try to go back to the basics. You'll notice, I mean, if you've been here for any length of time, it probably gets very repetitive, which helps, I think, everybody to not be lulled into a sense of complacency, even if you've been here, especially you mentioned along the Grand Strand for a long time. But especially for new residents, that's something, especially the local emergency managers and any sort of outreach efforts, any sort of community events they go to, is really hammering a lot of the basics, making sure that people who move here are given all that information as much as possible about the evacuation zones, about preparing for hurricanes, for flooding. Do you know what flood area you're in? If there's any sort of updated floodplain mapping, doing a lot of local outreach to ensure that hopefully whether you've been here for 20 years or you just moved here, that you are as aware as you can be of your specific hazard at your location. So that's really an ongoing effort. I wouldn't say anything's necessarily changed our end. We're just really continue to be focused on pushing preparedness messaging as much as possible. So we have hurricane preparedness weeks, we have earthquake preparedness weeks, winter weather preparedness weeks to even really tailor that message down even further to get that preparedness information out to everybody.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Gabe, for such an excellent question. Okay, I'll give it a couple more seconds to see if anyone has any questions. Could you please put up the slide with South Carolina resources? Yes, we can do that very quickly. Okay, well, there was a participant feedback survey that was added to the chat. We encourage you to please share your feedback and thoughts in there. That's what helps us improve these webinars. Thank you so much for joining us today. But before we wrap it up, I'm going to pass it over to Joe at AARP to close us off.
Hey, Leanne. That brings us to the end of today's webinar. A sincere thank you to Leanne and Natalie of Strongword, as well as Andrew Phillips at the South Carolina Emergency Management Division for sharing their time and expertise. And thank all of you for joining us and taking this important step towards preparedness. I just want to remind you one more time about the sites you can visit, SCEMD at scmd.org for the South Carolina Emergency Manager Guide, evacuation zones and alerts, Strongword at wearestrongword.org for preparedness resources and recovery support. You can also look for upcoming events and programs that we have at AARP at aarp.org/sc or aarp.org/near me. On behalf of AARP South Carolina, thank you again. Stay safe, get prepared, and we hope to see you at a future event. Have a great afternoon.